Some moments in life leave scars so deep you can feel them for years, even when they're invisible to everyone else. For years, I was invisible to my family, a woman treated as if my existence didn't matter. But that would change. It all started with one cruel act that I never saw coming. And from there, everything shifted. I wasn't just going to take it anymore. I never thought it would come to this. Never thought I'd feel the sting of rejection so deep in my chest, not from strangers, but from my own flesh and blood. Frank, my husband of over 30 years, was too absorbed in his job to notice. My children, Emily and Jake, they had their own lives, their own priorities, and I was just the person who cooked their meals, folded their clothes, and watched from the sidelines as they carried on with their busy, important lives. I wasn't part of their world. I hadn't been for a long time. But it wasn't just them. It was Tessa, my daughter-in-law. Oh, Tessa, who could never see me as anything more than a nuisance. It was at one of those family gatherings, you know the kind, where everyone puts on their best face for the sake of appearances. I had been waiting for the chance to hold Lucas, my grandson. I hadn't seen him much lately, but every time I reached out, Tessa would step in with that look, like I was some kind of threat. That day, she said it right in front of everyone, as if it were perfectly normal. "Mom," she said, looking straight at me with a polite smile on her face. "Lucas cries when he's around old people." The words hit me like a slap. Not just the words, but the way she said it, so nonchalantly, as if I were nothing more than a burden to this family. I sat there, in front of everyone, feeling the heat of shame rise in my chest. Everyone heard her, and no one said a word. I tried to smile, tried to keep my face calm, but inside I was crumbling. I wasn't allowed to hold my grandson because he cried around old people. My own flesh and blood, the only thing I ever felt had real meaning in my life, was being held away from me by my son's wife. And the worst part? Not a single person defended me. Not Frank, not Jake, and certainly not Emily. No one even looked uncomfortable. They just let her do it. Let her humiliate me. That night, after the dinner was over, I walked into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. Frank, of course, was already asleep, too tired from work to even notice my mood. I pulled the covers over me and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. It never did anymore. I had been living in a house full of people for years, and yet I was completely, utterly alone. I felt it deep in my bones. I was invisible, disposable. The thought gnawed at me, tearing me apart from the inside out. But it was in that moment, lying there in the dark, that something inside me shifted. No more. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me. I didn't care how old I was, or how invisible they made me feel. I wasn't going to let this be my life anymore. I didn't know how, but I was going to make them see me. I was going to make them respect me, and I wasn't going to do it by asking for it. No, I would take it. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe it was the sting of Tessa's words, or the quiet indifference of my own children. Maybe it was the fact that, even after everything I had done for them over the years, no one cared. But something inside me snapped. It was the last straw. I was done. In the days that followed, I started to pull away from them. I didn't say anything, didn't cause a scene, but I stopped caring. And that, more than anything, started to make a difference. But it wasn't just my family I was turning away from. There was someone else who had started to notice me. Someone who saw me for who I really was, not just the background character in everyone else's life. Carlos. He was 15, young, kind-hearted, and working hard to help his mother, Maria, who had been a widow for years. He lived 2 houses down from us and had always been kind to me, helping me out with little things here and there, like fixing a light bulb or carrying groceries. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, I was just an old woman to him. Nothing special. But over time, I realized how much he actually cared. He started sitting with me sometimes, just talking. It wasn't much, but for the first time in a long time, someone was listening. He didn't ask for anything in return. He just asked about me, my life, my thoughts, my stories. It felt good to be seen, to be heard, to matter. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, Carlos walked over to me, a concerned look on his face. "Are you okay?" "Doris?" he asked, his voice gentle, but filled with sincerity. I hesitated. Should I tell him? Should I burden this young boy with my pain? But before I could stop myself, the words spilled out. "I'm not okay, Carlos. I feel invisible. My own family doesn't even care about me. I try so hard, but it's like I don't even exist to them. Carlos sat down next to me, quiet for a moment before he spoke. You do matter, Doris. I know it might not feel like it, but you do. People don't always know how to show it, but I see it. His words hit me harder than I thought they would. For the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of something, hope maybe. That was when I realized something important. I wasn't alone. Not completely. Carlos, in his own way, was standing with me, and he didn't see me as a burden. He saw me as someone worth caring about, and that changed everything. I didn't know it then, but Carlos would become a big part of what was to come, a big part of my plan. But for now, I needed time to think. Time to figure out how I was going to make them see me, how I was going to take control of my own life again, how I was going to make sure that Tessa, Frank, Emily, and Jake would never be able to treat me like that again. And I would do it quietly. I would do it with strategy, with precision. I would make them regret the day they ever took me for granted. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I was starting to feel something stirring inside me. A sense of purpose, a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. And I wasn't going to stop until I had my revenge. The days that followed were strangely quiet. It was like the calm before the storm. I continued with my usual routine, making Frank's breakfast, packing his lunch, preparing dinner, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like I was just going through the motions. I wasn't doing these things for anyone anymore. I was doing them for me. I was learning to reclaim pieces of myself that had long been buried. Tessa kept her distance. At least, that's how it felt. She still called occasionally, still made sure to send her usual texts about Lucas and how I should be careful with him, but there was no warmth. There hadn't been any warmth in a long time. She never once asked me how I was feeling. She didn't care, and that was okay. Because I had stopped caring about her too. The real solace, the only real connection I had, was with Carlos. I didn't realize it at first, but his presence had become a lifeline for me. He would come over after school sometimes, helping me with chores around the house, fixing a leaky faucet, mowing the lawn, or even just sitting with me while I folded laundry. His kindness was so pure, so real, that it made the weight of my family's indifference feel a little lighter. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch sipping my tea, I watched Carlos walk toward me with his usual smile. He was holding a small bag of groceries, his hands covered in dirt from the garden. He didn't ask to come in, didn't need to. He simply sat beside me. "How are you doing today, Doris?" he asked, his voice like a warm breeze. I sighed, my eyes tracing the lines of the horizon. "I'm getting by. I'm tired, Carlos. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being the person no one notices unless they need something." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I was feeling. "You know, it's not fair, the way they treat you. My mom, Maria, she always says you should never let anyone make you feel like you're not important." I chuckled bitterly. "It's easy for her to say. I'm not sure how to fix it, Carlos. My family, they don't see me. They only see what they need from me." Carlos placed his hand over mine, his grip warm and steady. "Maybe you don't need to fix it, Doris. Maybe it's them who need to fix themselves. Maybe they just need a reminder of how much you've given to them." His words were like a balm to my soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, really seen. It wasn't just about what I did for them, but about who I was. And in that moment, I realized something. Carlos wasn't just helping me with little things. He was giving me back my dignity. He was helping me remember that I mattered. Over the next few weeks, I began to distance myself more from Frank, Emily, and Jake. I didn't make any grand declarations or confrontations. I didn't need to. I simply stopped doing the little things that kept me tethered to them. I stopped making their meals, stopped cleaning up after them. I stopped pretending to be a part of a family that didn't acknowledge me. Instead, I focused on myself. I spent more time with Carlos, sharing stories of my past, of how I used to be full of life, how I once believed in the idea of family. Carlos listened, asking questions, genuinely curious about me and my life. It wasn't like the conversations I had with Frank or my kids, who barely listened long enough for me to finish a sentence. There was a shift in me, a growing sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. I was slowly regaining control of my own narrative. It wasn't about vengeance yet. It was about rediscovering who I was. It was about seeing my worth again, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to beg for love and attention anymore. But the most important realization came to me one night as I lay in bed. I had been thinking about Tessa, about the way she'd dismissed me so casually, as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let her continue treating me like this. I wasn't going to. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to ask for respect. I was going to take it. And I wasn't going to do it through anger or confrontation. No, I would use their own actions against them. I would make them see me for who I truly was. It wasn't going to be easy. But with Carlos by my side, I knew I had a chance. The first step was simple, planting the seed of doubt. Tessa's constant criticism of me, her condescension, had to be addressed, but I wasn't going to confront her directly. I was smarter than that. No, I would do it quietly, carefully, making sure to leave just enough room for the truth to sink in. And when it did, when my family saw Tessa for what she truly was, everything would change. I wasn't going to be ignored anymore. Not by Tessa, not by Frank, and not by Emily or Jake. The gloves were off, but I knew I had to be patient. Every move had to be calculated. Every word had to be measured. I wasn't playing a short game here. I was playing for the long haul. And when the time was right, I would make my move. The pieces were falling into place, and I was ready. But for now, I simply let the silence speak for itself. The more I withdrew, the more I began to see things clearly. My family's indifference wasn't just about me. It was a pattern, a behavior ingrained over years of neglect. Frank was too wrapped up in his work to notice. Emily and Jake were too busy with their own lives. And Tessa was just as controlling as she always had been. Always undermining me, dismissing me like I was some insignificant detail in their perfect little world. It wasn't just about the way they treated me. It was about the way I allowed it to happen. For years, I had swallowed their disregard, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing by being the good wife and good mother. I thought if I kept my head down, kept doing my duties without complaint, they'd come around. But they never did. And the worst part was that I was letting it happen. I had become so small, so invisible to them, that I didn't even know who I was anymore. But that was all about to change. I had been thinking about what Carlos said to me, about how maybe it wasn't me who needed fixing. Maybe it was them. Maybe they needed to be reminded of the person I was. And I wasn't going to do it by begging or pleading. I wasn't going to grovel for their attention. No, I was going to make them see me, make them regret the way they treated me. But I needed a plan, something subtle, something they wouldn't see coming. I started by pulling away even more. I stopped cooking the big meals I usually made for everyone. I stopped doing their laundry, stopped cleaning the house. When Frank came home from work, I barely acknowledged him. I didn't greet him at the door with his dinner like I used to. I just went about my own business, quietly, letting the silence hang between us. And with Emily and Jake, I became a ghost. I no longer asked how their days were. I didn't make small talk about their lives. I simply gave them space. Space to see that I wasn't going to be their unpaid maid anymore. If they needed something, they would have to ask. But they didn't ask. No one did. The change wasn't dramatic at first, but it was noticeable. And I knew it was working. They didn't like it. They didn't like being the ones who had to adjust. They didn't like having to pick up the slack, or worse, they didn't like having to acknowledge that I wasn't there for them the way I had always been. The real change, though, came when I started paying more attention to the dynamics between Tessa and my kids. Tessa was good at playing the role of the perfect wife and mother. She was charming when she needed to be, always the picture of politeness. But I had seen through that facade for a long time. I had seen how she treated me, how she belittled me, how she made me feel invisible. And I realized that, despite her efforts to paint herself as the perfect daughter-in-law, there was something about her that made people uncomfortable. There was a coldness to her, a control that seeped through in little ways, like the way she always made decisions for Lucas without consulting anyone, the way she acted like the family's finances were her business alone, the way she always inserted herself into every conversation, but never once asked me about my thoughts or feelings. It was then that I decided I would plant a seed of doubt. It wouldn't be obvious, at least not at first. It would be subtle, a little thing here and there that would make my children question her. I didn't need them to hate her. I just needed them to see her for what she really was, someone who didn't have their best interests at heart. So, over the next few days, I started dropping small comments, carefully placed and seemingly innocent. You know, I've always been there for Emily and Jake. I've helped them with everything, from college tuition to buying their first cars. Tessa, though, I don't think she'd ever ask for help, even if she needed it. She's always so independent. I don't know if that's a good thing. At first it was small talk, casual comments, nothing too forceful, but I noticed that Emily and Jake were beginning to take notice. They didn't ask me about it directly, but I could see it in their eyes when they looked at Tessa. I could see the questions forming in their minds. It wasn't just about planting doubt in their minds. It was about showing them the truth, a truth they hadn't seen before because they had been so wrapped up in their own lives, so blinded by Tessa's perfect image of herself. It was about showing them that Tessa wasn't the angel she made herself out to be. Carlos helped with this too. I didn't tell him exactly what I was doing, but he understood that I needed his support. He would casually mention things around the neighborhood that would get back to Emily and Jake, things about how Tessa had treated some of the other neighbors, how she'd kept to herself and never helped anyone. He didn't need to say much, just a few carefully chosen words, and I could see it working. Slowly, but surely, the cracks in Tessa's perfect image began to appear, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I had to do more. I had to hit them where it hurt. I had to show them that Tessa wasn't just cold and controlling. She was selfish. And the best way to do that was to show them how she had been handling the family finances, something she had always kept hidden. It didn't take long to find the right opportunity. I knew Tessa had been struggling with money, trying to keep up appearances, but not really having the means to do so. I had heard things over the years, things she'd said to Frank about needing extra help with bills, things that didn't add up. She'd always kept it quiet, but I knew enough to understand that she was hiding something. I didn't go searching for it, but when I happened to overhear a conversation between Tessa and Jake one night, I knew I had the leverage I needed. Tessa was asking Jake to lend her money for a personal emergency, but she wouldn't say what it was for. Jake seemed suspicious, but he didn't press her. He was too willing to help, too eager to keep the peace. That was when I decided. This was my moment. I wasn't going to confront her directly, though. That would have been too easy. Instead, I started to plant the idea in Jake's head that Tessa might be hiding things from him, things that could affect their future. I didn't need to accuse her outright. I just needed him to question her, to doubt her judgment. And slowly, it worked. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The silence in the house was growing louder, and I could feel the tension in the air. Every day felt like a quiet battle, one that I didn't need to speak about. I wasn't just waiting for something to happen. I was making things happen. It was subtle, quiet, but there was no mistaking it. They were beginning to notice. Frank was starting to look confused, unsure of why his meals weren't ready when he got home. He asked me about it once, his voice laced with frustration. "Doris, what's going on? You've stopped doing everything." I looked up from the book I was reading, pretending to be calm, unbothered. "I'm just tired, Frank. I've been doing everything for everyone for years. Maybe it's time you all learned to take care of yourselves for once." His eyes narrowed, the slightest flicker of anger dancing across his face, but I saw it, the guilt behind his words. He couldn't argue. He knew. He had known for years, but he had let it slide because it was easier to let me take the weight. But now, the weight was starting to shift. Emily had called me a few times over the past week, but the conversations were distant. At first, I had hoped things would return to normal, that I could somehow go back to being the mother they needed. But each time we spoke, I noticed a subtle detachment in her voice. She was starting to realize that I wasn't going to be there, silently serving her and Jake anymore. And then, there was Tessa. I had made sure to plant enough seeds of doubt in Emily's and Jake's minds that Tessa's perfect image was starting to crack. But I wasn't going to stop there. I knew they would only start to see the truth if they understood how much Tessa had been controlling everything, especially the finances. That's where I needed to hit her hardest. Carlos had been my ally, though not in the way my family would ever imagine. He wasn't doing anything malicious. He didn't need to, but I could see it. He was learning how to play the long game with me. He knew how to keep his words light, but they were always just heavy enough to get noticed. We had built an understanding, an alliance that had no need for explanations. I decided to make my next move, and this one was going to require precision. I had already made Emily and Jake question Tessa's actions, but they didn't have the full picture yet. They didn't know how manipulative she had been behind their backs. And that was something I could expose, something that would change everything. One evening, when Emily came by to drop off some things for Lucas, I seized the opportunity. I had invited her over for tea, knowing she wouldn't be able to resist a chance to catch up. I could see she was still distant, hesitant, but I wasn't going to let her slip away. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something," I said, pouring the tea slowly. She looked up, eyebrows raised. "What's wrong, Mom?" I paused, taking my time. The silence stretched out longer than I intended, but it was effective. When I spoke, I did so carefully. "You know, when Frank and I were raising you kids, we never had much. We worked hard, but we made sure to always share with one another. Tessa's always been different." Emily furrowed her brow. "What do you mean, different?" I sighed, keeping my voice steady. "She's always so secretive about the money, about the way she handles everything. Have you noticed that? She's never really open about what's going on in their finances. It's like she doesn't trust anyone." Emily shifted uncomfortably, clearly not prepared for this conversation. "I don't know, Mom. I haven't really thought about it." I leaned forward slightly, making sure she was paying attention. "I overheard something the other day. I didn't want to bring it up, but she's been hiding things, Emily. I heard her ask Jake for money and she wouldn't say why. And then there's always this pressure, this weight she puts on the family, like everything has to be perfect, like no one else can be involved. It's not healthy. You know that, right?" Emily's face softened, but she still wasn't sure how to respond. She knew I was right, but she was conflicted. "I don't know, Mom. I just don't want to cause any problems. Things are already so tense with her." I didn't push. I just nodded, letting the silence settle again. The seed was planted, and I could see the doubt flicker in her eyes. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and that was enough for me. Later that night, I found myself sitting on the porch with Carlos, watching the stars. I had told him everything, how I had slowly started to make Emily question Tessa, how I had planted those little doubts. He didn't say much, just nodded, but I could see he understood the importance of what I was doing. "You're doing the right thing, Doris," he said, his voice quiet. "They need to see what she's really like." I glanced at him, my heart swelling with gratitude. He was right. They needed to see it. They needed to understand how Tessa had been manipulating them for so long. She was good at pretending to be perfect, but everyone had a breaking point, and I was going to make sure Tessa's came soon. The following days brought more silence from my family. Frank started looking at me more suspiciously, as if he wasn't sure where all of this was leading. He didn't say it outright, but I knew he felt the shift. He was starting to realize that I wasn't going to play the same role I always had, and that scared him. But I wasn't finished yet. The next step was coming, and when it arrived, I was going to make sure Tessa had nowhere left to hide. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control, and it felt damn good. The storm was coming, but it was still quiet. I didn't have to say much anymore. My silence was louder than any words I could have spoken. As I let the days pass, the change in the house was palpable. Frank was more on edge, although he didn't admit it. He started asking questions he hadn't before, like why I wasn't doing the little things I used to do around the house. But there was no real anger behind his voice, just confusion. It was clear he didn't know how to handle my distance. I wasn't a part of his routine anymore, and it was starting to bother him. The more I pulled away, the more the family began to feel the absence of my presence. Frank would wander into the kitchen, expecting to find dinner waiting for him, only to find a note saying, "Help yourself tonight. I'm not hungry." The note wasn't confrontational. It was just the simple truth. I wasn't hungry for their empty words, their hollow requests. And as for Emily and Jake, they were beginning to realize that I wasn't just sulking. I was doing something. I was shifting the balance in the house in ways they hadn't expected. Their calls became less frequent, and when they did call, I could tell they were uncomfortable, unsure of how to interact with me now that I had stopped playing the role they were used to. They didn't know what to say when I didn't need them the way I used to. It was Tessa, though, who I knew would be the hardest to crack. She was the one who had the most control over this entire family, not just with Frank, but with the kids as well. The way she carried herself, so composed, so perfect, had kept her in power for years. But I had started to see through the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. It was the little things, like how she would dismiss Frank's opinions in front of everyone, or how she would subtly undermine me, make me feel like I didn't matter. I started to see her for who she really was, manipulative, controlling, and ultimately selfish. But what I didn't see right away was how much she was hiding. Her financial situation was worse than I had expected, and I knew that this was my way in. I began to gather small pieces of information, things that seemed insignificant at first, but were beginning to paint a bigger picture. Tessa's obsession with appearances, her insistence on keeping up with the Joneses, even when she couldn't afford to, all of it was starting to show. She had been playing the perfect wife and mother, but behind closed doors, there was a desperation I hadn't noticed before. One evening, as I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, I overheard a conversation between Frank and Tessa. I hadn't meant to listen in, but their voices carried through the open window. Frank's tone was frustrated, his words sharp. "We need to talk about the bills, Tessa. We can't keep pretending everything's fine. The credit cards are maxed out, and you're not telling me the whole truth about where the money's going." Tessa's voice, calm and collected as always, responded. "It's just temporary, Frank. I've got it under control. We'll be fine. I just need a little more time." But there was something in her voice that betrayed her. I knew then. This wasn't just a temporary setback. Tessa was in over her head, and she had been hiding it from everyone. That night, I took a moment to sit down and gather my thoughts. I wasn't going to go in guns blazing. I wasn't going to confront her directly. No, I was going to make sure I had everything in place before I made my next move. I needed to use this information carefully, strategically. Carlos, as always, was my sounding board. I had learned to trust him, and I wasn't going to let him down. He had become more than just a friend to me. He was like family now, someone who understood the pain of being overlooked and dismissed. When I told him what I had overheard, he didn't say much, just nodded in understanding. "You're on the right track, Doris. People like Tessa, they don't change unless you hit them where it hurts." I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to confront her head on. No, I needed her to expose herself. I needed her to panic, to make a mistake. And when she did, I would be ready to capitalize on it. The next few days were crucial. I started slipping small details about her financial struggles into casual conversations, never directly accusing her of anything, just planting seeds in the minds of Frank and the kids. I overheard Tessa talking about the bills the other day. I would say nonchalantly, as if it were no big deal. "She doesn't seem too concerned about it, though. I guess she's got everything under control." It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to make Frank start to ask more questions. Enough to make Emily and Jake begin to look at Tessa with a little more suspicion. I wasn't going to rush this. I was letting the idea simmer in their minds, knowing that eventually they would come to their own conclusions. I had to remind myself to be patient. This was all a delicate balance. I couldn't force their hand. I had to let them come to me. And when they did, when they finally saw Tessa for what she truly was, that would be my moment. But the best part? They wouldn't even see it coming. They thought I was just the old woman, fading into the background. They didn't know that I was playing the long game, and in the end, I would come out on top. The next move was clear. I had to get to the heart of the matter. I needed to make sure Tessa couldn't deny her financial troubles. I needed to make sure she couldn't cover it up anymore. And when the time came, I would expose her. Slowly, methodically, without her even realizing it. I felt a sense of satisfaction in my bones. This was just the beginning. The storm was brewing, and soon enough, everything would come crashing down. The game had changed. I could feel it in the air, the way the house had become thick with unspoken tension. Frank was no longer just confused. He was on edge, watching me carefully, unsure of how to react to my growing distance. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to explain myself. The silence between us spoke louder than any words could have. I could see the doubt creeping into his mind, the cracks in his loyalty to Tessa starting to appear. He had always been the type to avoid confrontation, to sweep things under the rug and pretend everything was fine. But now, there was no rug to sweep things under. I had pulled back, and with each passing day, he was forced to see the reality he had ignored for so long. But it wasn't just Frank who was affected. Emily and Jake were too. Emily had called me once more, but this time there was something different in her voice, something uncertain, like she was searching for something. I could tell that the seeds I had planted in their minds were starting to take root. "Mom," Emily said, her voice hesitant, "you've been distant. Are you okay?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took a moment to consider my words. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Tired of being the one who's always expected to do everything for everyone." There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you saying you don't want to help us anymore?" I could feel the weight of her question, the unspoken guilt that hung between us. But I wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't going to go back to the role I had played for so long. "No, Emily," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I've done my part. It's time for all of you to start taking care of yourselves. You're grown adults now." The conversation ended with her still unsure of what to say, but I knew she was thinking. She was beginning to understand, albeit reluctantly, that I wasn't going to be there to fix everything for her anymore. And that was exactly what I wanted. As for Jake, he was becoming increasingly distant. I could see him watching me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, a look of uncertainty in his eyes. He was starting to realize that I wasn't going to be the same Doris I had been. He didn't say it, but I could feel the shift in him. He was beginning to question things. It was Tessa, though, who was the true target of my plan. I knew the others would follow suit eventually, but it was Tessa's behavior I needed to expose. I had made her a subtle target, pushing her just enough so that she would eventually reveal herself. It was the day of the family barbecue when things truly started to fall apart. We had all gathered in the backyard, everyone pretending to enjoy the day, trying to keep up appearances. Frank was at the grill, flipping burgers with the usual enthusiasm, while Emily and Jake were mingling with friends. I sat at the table, watching, waiting, and then Tessa came over to me, as she often did, trying to act like we were on good terms. She sat down next to me with that cold, practiced smile of hers. "Doris," she said sweetly, "how's everything going?" I smiled back, but I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "It's fine," I replied, just enjoying the peace and quiet. She didn't catch the underlying meaning in my words. She never did. "Good, good. You know, I've been thinking about Lucas. I think it might be time to have a serious conversation about his future. I was hoping you'd be more involved in helping me figure things out." I couldn't help but feel the anger bubble beneath the surface. She had the nerve to ask for my help after everything she'd done to me, after treating me like I was invisible. "I think Lucas is fine," I said calmly, though every word was laced with meaning. "You've got it all under control, haven't you? You've always been so good at managing everything." Her smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course," she said, her tone sharp. "I'm just trying to make sure everyone's on the same page." I could feel the tension between us, and I knew she could feel it too. But she didn't know what I was really up to. She didn't know that every word I spoke to her, every casual comment, was part of the larger plan. She didn't realize that she was digging her own grave. It was then that Emily approached the table. She looked between Tessa and me, sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere. I didn't look at her, but I could feel her eyes on me, her uncertainty growing with each passing second. "Everything okay here?" Emily asked, a little too cheerfully. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence speak for itself. Then, I turned to her slowly, my voice steady. "Just fine, Emily. Just having a little chat." I could see Emily looking at Tessa now, really looking at her, and for the first time, she saw something she hadn't seen before. I didn't need to say anything. My silence was all the explanation she needed. Later that evening, after the barbecue had died down and the guests had left, I overheard Frank and Tessa talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen, but their conversation drifted into the living room, where I sat quietly. I heard Frank's voice, more frustrated than I had ever heard it before. "Tessa, we need to talk about this. The bills are piling up, and I don't know what's going on with you. You've been hiding things from me, haven't you?" I froze. Tessa's voice was calm, almost too calm. "There's nothing to worry about, Frank. It's all under control. I just need a little more time." Frank's response was sharp. "You keep saying that, but I don't believe you anymore. I want to know where the money's been going." Tessa didn't respond. The silence that followed was thick with tension. I knew it wasn't just the bills anymore. Frank was beginning to see the cracks in the perfect image Tessa had built for herself. And when Frank saw it, Emily and Jake would soon follow. The next day, I decided to push the envelope further. I casually mentioned Tessa's financial struggles to Emily, dropping just enough of a hint that it would make her think twice. "You know, Emily," I said as we sat in the living room, "it's hard to keep up appearances when the bills aren't being paid, don't you think?" Emily's eyes widened slightly. She didn't respond immediately, but I could see the question in her eyes. The seed had been planted, and it was only a matter of time before it grew. I was getting closer. It wouldn't be long before Tessa's carefully crafted world began to unravel, and when it did, I would be waiting. Everything was falling into place. The storm was brewing, and Tessa didn't even realize it. It had been a few days since the barbecue, and I could feel the wheels in motion, even though no one else seemed to notice just yet. The tension in the house was palpable, and I could see it in Frank's eyes every time he looked at me now. He had always been so focused on his work, so absorbed in everything that didn't involve the family, but now there was something different in him. It was like a flicker of awareness had sparked behind his tired eyes, and I knew he was starting to see things for what they were. Frank's routine hadn't changed much. He still came home at the same time every day, still buried himself in the newspaper after dinner, pretending to ignore the undercurrents swirling around him. But now, he was noticing. He was noticing that the house was quieter, that I wasn't running around behind the scenes, making sure everyone's needs were met, and I could tell it unsettled him. It should have, considering how little he had done to acknowledge my efforts over the years. But what really made me feel like I was on the verge of something was Emily's silence. She hadn't brought up the conversation we'd had about Tessa, but I could see the shift in her. She was trying to stay neutral, but I knew her well enough to see the wheels turning in her head. Every time she looked at me now, I could feel the weight of her judgment, her growing understanding that maybe, just maybe, I had a point. I wasn't the only one who noticed the subtle change in Emily, though. Tessa did too. She had started to act a little more cautiously around me. At first, she had tried to maintain her usual air of superiority, as if I hadn't noticed how she would glance at me sideways when she thought I wasn't looking. But she had stopped being so overtly controlling. She wasn't pushing me around as much anymore, and that was a small victory. The real breakthrough came one afternoon when Emily came to visit. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when she knocked and entered without waiting for me to answer. She stood there for a moment, her hands folded in front of her, hesitant. I put my book down, silently acknowledging her presence. "Mom," she began, her voice soft but edged with a hint of uncertainty. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how you've been acting lately, about how things have been changing around here." I didn't respond immediately. I just waited, giving her the space to work through what she was feeling. I could see she was struggling to make sense of it all. "I don't want to sound like I'm accusing you of anything," Emily continued, her eyes flickering nervously as she glanced at me. "But I think I understand why you've been acting the way you have. It's just, I don't know. It's all so complicated." I knew what she was trying to say. She didn't want to acknowledge it fully yet, didn't want to admit that her own mother had been right about everything. But it was a start, a tiny crack in the wall she had built up around her perception of Tessa. It was a crack that I intended to widen. I gave her a slow nod, letting the silence hang between us for a moment. "You've been noticing, haven't you?" She looked down, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "I think I've been blind, Mom. I never really saw what was happening, and now that I do, I don't know how to deal with it. With Tessa, she's different from what I thought." There it was, the admission I had been waiting for. It wasn't just the subtle seeds of doubt I had planted over the past few weeks. It was her own realization, her own growing understanding of the woman she had been blindly supporting for so long. "I'm not asking you to choose sides, Emily," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you deserve to see the truth. You deserve to see that Tessa has been manipulating all of us. Me, Frank, and even you." Emily looked up at me, her face conflicted. She didn't want to believe it, not yet. But she was starting to. I could see it in her eyes. The truth was beginning to settle in, and that was all I needed. "Mom, I don't know what to say," Emily said, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't want to see it before. I didn't want to think that Tessa wasn't perfect. But now I see things differently." I reached out and took her hand gently in mine. "You don't have to say anything, sweetheart. Just think about it. Take your time, and when you're ready, we'll talk again. But I need you to trust me on this." Emily squeezed my hand and nodded. "I do trust you, Mom. I just don't know what to do now." I wanted to tell her that everything would work out, that things would get better, but I couldn't. I knew it was going to take time for Emily to process everything, and I wasn't going to rush her. This was her journey too, and she had to come to her own conclusions about Tessa. But one thing was clear. I had planted the seed in her mind, and it was beginning to grow. The next few days were quieter, more introspective. Frank was still oblivious, still living in his own world of work and distraction, but I could see the way he looked at me now. He wasn't angry. He was confused, like he was starting to realize that I wasn't going to be the woman I used to be, the woman who had sacrificed everything for them. It was Emily who made the next move. She called me one evening, her voice softer than usual. "Mom," she said, "I think I figured it out. Tessa, she's been controlling everything, hasn't she? And we've all just let her." I nodded, my heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and relief. "Yes, Emily, we've all let her manipulate us for too long, but that's going to change now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What do we do now?" "We wait," I said simply. "We let her expose herself. She's already on the edge. She's just one mistake away from everything falling apart. And when she does, we'll be ready." It was a strange feeling, knowing that the end game was coming closer. But I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Ready to finally be seen. Ready to finally be heard. And when the time came, I would make sure Tessa would never hurt me or anyone else again. I could feel it in my bones. The storm was brewing. And this time, I wasn't just going to weather it. I was going to control it. The pieces were finally falling into place. The tension in the house had reached its peak. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. Frank had stopped asking questions, but I could see it in the way he looked at me. He didn't know what was happening, but something was shifting. He was becoming aware, slowly but surely, that the role I had played for years, the dutiful wife, the invisible mother, was no longer mine. And while he didn't say anything, I knew he could feel it. Emily, on the other hand, was starting to act differently. There was a hesitance in her voice when she spoke to me now, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me, or whether she should even be questioning things. But she was, and that was what mattered. Jake had grown quieter too, sensing the same shift in the air. He wasn't one to openly express his thoughts, but I could feel his growing discomfort, his uncertainty about Tessa. He hadn't said it directly, but I knew he was beginning to question her, even if he didn't know what to do with that newfound doubt. And then there was Tessa. She had always been the one with control, always the one who managed the household, who dictated the terms. But now, there was something different about her. I could see the cracks in her facade, the way her shoulders tensed whenever I looked her way, the way she seemed more calculating, more guarded. She was no longer the perfect daughter-in-law she had once been, and it was because she knew I had started to see through her. But it was time to hit her where it would hurt the most, where it would make everything unravel. I had been watching Tessa for weeks now, taking in every subtle movement, every word that slipped past her carefully constructed walls. I had been patient. I had been calculating, and now I was ready to make my move. Carlos was there, of course, helping me see things more clearly, supporting me without even needing to ask. He had been my confidant, my partner in this quiet war. I trusted him more than anyone in my own family, and I was starting to see how much he had learned from the situation. He was becoming more than just a young boy helping an old woman. He had grown into someone who understood the complexities of manipulation, of human nature, in ways my children never had. One evening, when Frank was at work and Emily was out with friends, I knew Tessa would be the only one left in the house. She was always hovering around, always pretending to be busy with something. But I had learned to read her movements, to see when she was trying to cover something up. I waited until she was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine, pretending to be calm. That was when I made my move. I casually walked into the room, acting as though nothing was out of the ordinary, as though we hadn't been at odds for so long. I sat down across from her, taking my time. She didn't look up at first, but I could feel the tension in the air. It was there, like static waiting to strike. "Tessa," I said softly, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking, about everything." She glanced up at me, her eyes flicking with just a hint of suspicion. "About what?" "About how things have changed around here. About how everyone's starting to notice the way you've been running things," I said, my voice steady, but with an edge. People are starting to ask questions about the finances, about why we've been so tight with money lately." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw her guard slip slightly. She wasn't used to being confronted like this. "I don't know what you're talking about, Doris," she said, her voice strained but attempting to remain calm. "Everything is fine. Everything's under control." I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a whisper as if I were sharing a secret. "It's funny, Tessa. I overheard Frank talking to you the other night. He seemed a little concerned about all these emergencies you keep having, the money you keep asking for. Don't you think he's starting to notice the way you've been hiding things from him?" Her eyes flashed with panic before she quickly masked it. She straightened up in her seat, trying to regain her composure. "Frank doesn't know anything," she said, her voice low but forceful. "And he doesn't need to." I didn't back down. I wasn't going to let her take control of this conversation. I had her exactly where I wanted her. "He's starting to question it, Tessa. The bills, the way you handle everything. You're not as perfect as you think you are. People are starting to see it, including Emily." Her eyes widened, just a little, but I could see the panic now, the unease she was trying so desperately to suppress. "Emily doesn't know anything," she snapped. "She doesn't need to. I'm doing what I have to do to keep this family running. You wouldn't understand." I smiled, knowing I had her. She had let her anger slip, and that was the crack I needed to widen. "I understand perfectly, Tessa. I've been watching you for a long time now, and I've seen the way you manipulate things, how you've controlled everything without anyone realizing it. But you can't keep doing it forever. The truth always comes out, and when it does, Frank, Emily, Jake, they'll all see you for who you really are." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Tessa was visibly rattled now, her composure slipping. She was used to being in control, used to keeping everyone under her thumb, but now I could see the cracks in her armor. She was no longer the confident, perfect daughter-in-law she had once been. She was vulnerable, and that vulnerability would be her undoing. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Doris," she said, her voice shaky but still trying to assert control. "But you won't win. You can't win." I didn't respond immediately. I let her words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of her fear. I wasn't interested in arguing with her anymore. I had already won. I had exposed her, shown her that the perfect image she had built was starting to crumble. The rest would come naturally. "I'm not trying to win, Tessa," I said quietly. "I'm just waiting for the truth to come out. And when it does, you'll have no one left to blame but yourself." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor, and walked out of the room without another word. I watched her go, feeling a strange satisfaction settle in my chest. The game was over. The pieces were in place, and the rest would follow. I had exposed her cracks, made her see that her control was slipping. The truth was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. And when it did, everything would fall apart. Tessa's perfect world would finally unravel, and there would be nothing she could do to stop it. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was in control. The calm after the storm was almost as unsettling as the storm itself. The confrontation with Tessa had been my final push, and now the pieces were beginning to fall into place. I could feel it in the air. Something was shifting. The tension in the house was thick, like the quiet before a storm's full force hit. Tessa had retreated into herself after our conversation. She didn't confront me again, didn't even try to push my buttons the way she usually did. I could tell she was shaken, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Her perfect, controlled facade was beginning to crack, and I knew she could feel it. The more I saw her unravel, the more I felt the weight of the power I had over her. It was like a quiet victory, one that didn't need to be loud or boastful. It was the kind of power that came from exposing the truth, from pulling back the curtain and showing everyone what was really going on behind the scenes. I continued to keep my distance from Frank, Emily, and Jake. I didn't push them, didn't chase after them like I had in the past. I wasn't the one who had been wronged in this family anymore. It was them. They were the ones who had ignored me, belittled me, and allowed Tessa to control everything. Now it was time for them to feel the consequences of their actions. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I had already said enough. Frank, however, was starting to show cracks in his own veneer. I noticed him looking at me differently, like he was trying to piece something together that he hadn't understood before. There were moments when his gaze lingered just a little too long, as if he was trying to figure out what had changed. He had spent so many years coasting through life, doing the bare minimum, that now that I had stopped being the woman who did everything for him, he was forced to pay attention. But instead of the usual anger, there was a sense of confusion in his eyes. He was trying to figure out why things had changed, but he wasn't willing to acknowledge the real reason. He wouldn't dare. As for Emily, she hadn't spoken to me directly about her growing suspicions about Tessa, but I could see it in her face. Every time she came over, there was a guardedness in her demeanor. I could feel her shifting, like she was trying to process what I had said to her weeks ago. But she wasn't ready yet. She wasn't ready to fully confront Tessa. and she wasn't ready to face the truth about the way I had been treated. But it was Jake who surprised me the most. He had always been quiet, the type to internalize everything, to push his feelings down and never confront anything head-on. But one afternoon, a few days after the confrontation with Tessa, I caught him standing in the kitchen, staring at the counter, deep in thought. He didn't see me come in, and for a moment I just watched him. It was strange. He looked so much like Frank in that moment, yet he seemed lost in a way Frank never was. Lost, but looking for something, searching for answers. "Jake," I said softly, breaking the silence. He snapped out of his thoughts and looked at me, his eyes widening for just a second. He hadn't expected me to speak to him. Hey, Mom?" I walked over and stood beside him at the counter. "You okay?" He hesitated before answering, his voice low. "I don't know, Mom. I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything. About Tessa. About you." I raised an eyebrow, surprised that he was opening up. "What do you mean?" Jake glanced around the room, as if making sure no one was listening. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been noticing stuff. Things aren't right. Not with her, not with us. I don't know how to say this, but I've been seeing what's been happening. The way she manipulates everything. The way you've been treated." My heart swelled with an unexpected rush of emotions. I hadn't expected Jake to come to me like this, not without a struggle. He had always been the quiet one, always taking the side of peace, always avoiding conflict, but he had seen it, and now he was ready to do something about it. "I don't know if I can fix this, Mom," he continued, looking almost apologetic, "but I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to keep pretending like everything's okay when it's not." I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice steady but soft. "Jake, it's not about fixing things anymore. It's about facing the truth. And I know it's hard, but the truth will come out." "It always does." He nodded, his face filled with a mixture of regret and uncertainty. "I don't know what to do about Tessa, but I think I'm ready to start seeing things for what they really are." I felt a surge of pride. My son had grown up, and in that moment, I realized he wasn't just my son anymore. He was someone who had the ability to see the world clearly, to recognize the manipulation that had been happening all around him. It was small, this admission from him, but it was everything. It was proof that the seed I had planted was beginning to take root. "I'll be here when you're ready, Jake," I said quietly. "I won't push you, but I'll always be here." He gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. "Thanks, Mom. I think I'm starting to understand more than I thought." I watched him walk out of the kitchen, feeling a sense of quiet triumph in my chest. He wasn't fully there yet, not by a long shot, but he was starting to see the cracks in Tessa's facade. And when he did, everything would change. I knew it wasn't over. The game was still in progress, but now I had more than just suspicion on my side. I had the truth, and the truth was powerful. It would set everything in motion. The storm was finally coming, and this time, it wasn't just Tessa who would get caught in the rain. It was impossible to ignore the growing unease in the house. The tension between Frank and me had reached a boiling point. He still hadn't come to terms with what was happening, but he was aware of the shifting dynamics. It was as though he could feel that something was slipping through his fingers. He had always been so wrapped up in his work, in his own world, but now that I had distanced myself, he was left to reckon with the reality of everything I had done for him, and how little he had appreciated it. The silence that had once been a comfortable, quiet companion in our home had become thick with unspoken words. Frank never brought up the things I had said to him. He never asked why I wasn't doing everything I used to do. Instead, he threw himself into his work even more, perhaps in an attempt to avoid facing the truth. I didn't expect him to understand right away. I didn't expect any of them to. But the seed had been planted, and it would grow. I just had to be patient. But there was another, more pressing matter now. Tessa. The way she had tried to dominate every conversation, every decision, every aspect of family life had become intolerable. For years, I had been a silent participant in her games, watching from the sidelines as she made herself the center of everything. But now that I had started to withdraw, to stop doing the little things that kept her in control, she was starting to unravel in front of me. She was no longer the woman who held the strings. She was the woman who could feel them slipping through her fingers. It was early one morning when I decided that the time had come. I could see the fear in Tessa's eyes whenever she looked at me now. I had stopped being the passive, invisible figure she could dismiss, and it was unsettling for her. I could almost hear her thoughts as she tried to figure out how to regain control. but I wasn't going to give her that power. Not anymore. I had been patient. I had played my cards quietly, strategically, but now it was time to end this. The opportunity presented itself one afternoon when Tessa came over to pick up Lucas. She was trying too hard to appear unaffected, to hold on to her composure, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She had no idea what was coming. I sat in the living room, pretending to read a magazine as she entered the house. She smiled stiffly when she saw me, but I didn't respond. I didn't even look up. "You're awfully quiet today," she said, her tone dripping with forced politeness. I didn't bother to make small talk. I wasn't interested in pleasantries anymore. "I've been thinking, Tessa," I said, my voice steady, almost cold. Her smile faltered, and I could see her brace herself. She knew exactly what I was about to say, even if she didn't know how much of it was true. "About what?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "About everything," I said slowly. "About the way you've manipulated Frank. About the way you've controlled this family. About the way you've made me feel like I don't even matter." Her expression shifted then, the mask slipping for just a second, revealing the crack in her perfect image. "What are you talking about?" "Doris?" she asked, her voice tight, almost defensive. "I've done everything for this family. I've kept things together." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the need to justify herself, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "Not this time." "You've kept things together all right," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "But only by keeping everyone at arm's length. You've controlled everything, from the finances to the way people feel about you. But it's all coming apart now, Tessa. The truth is starting to come out. Frank's starting to see it. Emily's starting to see it. And when they do, there's no going back." Tessa's face twisted in fury. "You're wrong. They don't see anything. You're just bitter. You've always been bitter." I stood up then, meeting her gaze with a calmness I hadn't known I could muster. "I'm not bitter, Tessa. I'm just finally seeing things clearly. And so is everyone else." I watched her back away, her eyes flicking nervously toward the door. She didn't know what to do with herself. Her perfect world was collapsing around her, and I was the one pushing it over the edge. "You won't win, Doris," she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "You'll never win. You're just an old woman trying to destroy everything." I wasn't fazed by her words. They didn't matter anymore. "The only thing I'm destroying is your control, Tessa, and I'm not doing it alone. You're doing it to yourself." Without waiting for a response, I walked past her, heading toward the kitchen. She was left standing there, seething in the living room, her facade completely shattered. I knew she was going to try to regain control, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now they were beginning to sprout. Later that evening, Emily called. I could tell she had been thinking about our previous conversations. There was a hesitance in her voice, but also something new, something different. "Mom," she said, her tone uncertain but soft. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I've been watching Tessa more closely. I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to see what you've been trying to show me." My heart lifted at her words, but I kept my voice calm. "It's okay, Emily. You don't have to say anything yet. I just want you to think about it. Take your time." "I will," she replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. I'm not sure what to do with all of this yet, but I won't ignore it anymore. I won't turn a blind eye." I could hear the resolve in her voice, and I knew it wasn't just words. She was beginning to understand. Slowly but surely, she was starting to see the truth. Everything was falling into place. The pieces had started to move, and there was no stopping the chain reaction now. Tessa's carefully crafted life, her perfect image of control, was beginning to crumble, and when it did, everyone would see her for what she really was. I was no longer just a passive observer. I was an active participant in this family's unraveling, and I was going to make sure they knew it. Tessa had no idea what was coming for her, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The storm was on the horizon, and this time, Tessa would be the one caught in the rain. The walls that Tessa had so carefully constructed around herself had started to crumble. The quiet tension that had hung in the air for weeks was now a storm, brewing with intensity. I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me. She knew that the end was near. The game she had been playing, the one where she controlled everything, was finally slipping from her grasp. She was no longer the queen of this house. The family was starting to see through her, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere around me. Frank, despite his reluctance, was beginning to ask more questions. Emily was finally acknowledging what had been right in front of her eyes for so long. Even Jake, who had always kept his distance from family drama, was no longer avoiding the truth. They were all starting to see that things weren't as they seemed, that the perfect little world Tessa had built for herself was built on lies. Tessa, however, was still trying to hold on to whatever control she had left. She came over the next day, her face carefully composed, her smile forced. She knew I had been talking to Frank, to Emily, to Jake. She had to have known. Had to. The way she looked at me was a mix of fear and anger, as if she was trying to intimidate me into silence. But I wasn't scared of her anymore. Not after everything I had seen, everything I had learned. "Doris," she said, her voice sweet but brittle. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at her, my expression calm, but inside, I was already anticipating her next move. She had nothing left to hide, and she knew it. This was her final attempt at regaining the upper hand. "What is it, Tessa?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the emotions that churned within me. She stepped closer, her eyes flicking to the side, almost nervously. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. This game you're playing, it's not going to end well for you." I raised an eyebrow. "The game I'm playing?" I said, barely containing the laughter that bubbled up inside me. "Tessa, if anyone's playing a game here, it's you. You've been playing everyone for years." Her smile faltered, and I saw it, the crack in her mask. For a moment, she was no longer the confident, manipulative woman who had controlled everything around her. She was just a woman cornered by the consequences of her own actions. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice tight now, her composure cracking. "I've done everything for this family. Everything. And you've always just sat by, never doing anything but complaining." I stood up slowly, crossing the room to face her. "You've done nothing for this family, Tessa. Everything you've done has been for you, for your image, for your control. You've manipulated Frank. You've manipulated Emily. You've manipulated me. But that stops now." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was too rattled, too unsteady to form a coherent argument. "You've been hiding things from Frank," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "You've been hiding the truth from him, from everyone. And now he's starting to see it. He's starting to see you for who you really are." Tessa's eyes widened, and I saw the panic flare behind them. "You don't know anything," she snapped, her voice rising with anger. "You think you can destroy everything? You think you can tear this family apart? You don't have that power." I stepped closer to her, so close now that she could feel my breath on her skin. "I don't need to destroy anything, Tessa. You're doing it yourself. You've already destroyed everything you've built, and now there's nothing left for you to hide behind." She recoiled, as if the words had physically hurt her. But I didn't care. The truth was out now, and there was no going back for her. "Frank knows," I said, my voice quiet but full of finality. "And Emily knows. Jake knows. They've all seen the cracks in your perfect little world. You're done." Her eyes filled with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out at me. But then, something in her face changed. The anger faded, replaced by something darker, something cold. "You think you've won?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with, Doris." I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of relief. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't have to fight anymore. Tessa had already lost. "No," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "I don't think I've won. I know I have." Tessa took a step back, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but there was nothing left for her to control. The truth was out. The damage had been done, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I stood there, watching her go, knowing that this was it. This was the end of everything she had built. The family would never be the same again. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know if Frank would finally open his eyes or if Emily would fully accept the truth. But it didn't matter anymore. I had done what I set out to do. I had reclaimed my place in this family. And more importantly, I had taken back control of my life. Tessa was gone, at least emotionally, and the storm that had been brewing for so long had finally passed. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Not completely. The final piece of the puzzle was still missing. Frank still had to make his choice. Emily and Jake still had their decisions to make. But one thing was certain. This time, I wasn't going to be the one left behind. I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of everything had a strange quietness to it, like the calm that follows a storm. The thunder had already rolled. The lightning had struck, and now all that was left was the wreckage. It wasn't over yet, but it was close. Tessa had done everything she could to control her world, to manipulate her way into this family's heart, but it had all crumbled, and I had played my part in it. As I sat in the living room that evening, the house felt different. It wasn't the place I had lived in for so many years, the place I had been reduced to nothing more than a servant, an afterthought. It wasn't a home where I had been ignored and neglected. Now, there was something else, something stronger. There was a power in knowing the truth, in being seen. For once, I wasn't invisible. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I didn't have to look at the caller ID to know who it was. It was Emily. She had been calling more and more, and while she hadn't fully confronted Tessa yet, I could hear it in her voice that she was beginning to understand. The truth was dawning on her, and it wasn't something she could turn away from anymore. "Mom?" Emily's voice was hesitant, unsure, but there was an urgency in it. "I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" I didn't hesitate. "Of course. I'll be here." A few minutes later, Emily was standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of resolve and fear. She hadn't fully accepted everything yet, but I could see that she was no longer the person who had been blindly defending Tessa. She had finally seen the truth for herself. She sat down across from me, her hands twisting in her lap. "I've been thinking about everything you said," she began, her voice shaky but determined. "About Tessa, about how I never saw it. I never saw how she was manipulating all of us. I didn't say anything, just let her talk, knowing that the hardest part was still coming. The reckoning. She needed to process it all, to understand that what she had been so reluctant to believe was the truth. I never wanted to believe it," Emily continued, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "She's always been the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect wife. She's been so good at making everyone think she's the one holding it all together. I didn't want to see what was really going on." I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But the truth doesn't change just because we don't want to see it. Tessa has been controlling everything for years, manipulating Frank, manipulating you, and using you all to keep herself in power. But now it's all coming out, and you have to face it." Emily wiped at her eyes, nodding slowly. "I don't know how I didn't see it before. I feel so stupid." I shook my head. "You're not stupid, Emily. You were just blinded by the idea of the perfect family, by the picture she painted. But now you know the truth. That's what matters." She was quiet for a moment, processing everything. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were clear, determined. "I'm going to talk to Frank," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm going to make him see what Tessa has done. I can't just keep ignoring it. I can't keep pretending everything's fine." I felt a surge of pride. Emily was finally seeing things for what they were. She was ready to take action. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be here when you need me. We're family, and we'll get through this together." There was a long silence as she took it all in, and then she smiled. The first real smile I had seen from her in months. It was bittersweet, but it was a start. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll talk to Frank, and I'll make sure he sees everything. It's time we all face the truth." The next few days felt like the calm before the storm's final crash. Emily spent time with Frank, carefully planting the seeds of doubt, showing him what Tessa had been hiding. It wasn't easy for her. She was still struggling with the betrayal, still coming to terms with everything she had overlooked for so long. But she was doing it. She was taking the necessary steps to reclaim her own power, to free herself from the hold Tessa had over her. Frank wasn't an easy man to crack, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Tessa had underestimated him, thinking that he would always turn a blind eye to her manipulations. But Frank was starting to see things clearly, and that was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't long before the confrontation came. Frank, Emily, and I sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. Tessa was finally about to face the consequences of everything she had done. She had no idea what was coming. The moment she stepped through the door, I could see the look in her eyes, like she was already preparing to defend herself, to control the situation. But she didn't know. She had lost, and this time, I wasn't going to let her win. "Doris," she said coldly, her voice still dripping with false sweetness. "Emily, Frank, what's this all about?" Emily was the first to speak, her voice steady and strong. "Tessa, we know everything. We know what you've been doing. How you've been hiding things from Dad, from all of us. And it's over. We're not going to let you control this family anymore." Tessa's expression faltered for just a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice almost pleading now. "I did everything for this family. I kept it together when no one else could. You don't understand what I've had to do to keep us afloat." Frank stood up, his voice stern, the man I had once known. "You've been lying to me, to all of us, and I won't let you do it anymore. You've manipulated everyone for far too long." Tessa's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," Frank said quietly, his voice finally breaking through the fog of his own denial. "I should have seen it sooner, but now I see it, and I'm done." I watched as Tessa's world crumbled around her. It was like watching a building fall to the ground. She had nothing left. No one left to manipulate, no one to control. The truth had finally caught up with her, and she was no longer the queen she had once been. She was just a woman, exposed for who she really was. Tessa turned on her heel, her face flushed with rage, but there was nothing left for her here. She had already lost. She didn't say another word, didn't try to fight back. She just left. And this time, there was no coming back. Frank, Emily, and I stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything finally sinking in. I could feel the heaviness lifting, the burden of years of manipulation finally lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the chains that had bound me to Tessa's lies, to Frank's indifference. I had taken back my life, and now I could finally breathe. "We're going to be okay," Emily said softly, her hand resting on mine. I nodded. "We are." The storm had passed, and in its wake there was only peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.